Well, guys, something incredible, something is happening in Minnesota right now that the political establishment never thought that they would see. In fact, a chain reaction years in the making has finally detonated, and Governor Tim Walz is at the epicenter of this political earthquake and is shaking the entire nation. So tonight, brand new evidence has just surfaced, evidence that does not just expose the fraud, it exposes a network, a money trail, a pattern of political protection, insider favoritism, and donor cash that's flowing straight from the very individuals that are now indicted in one of the largest fraud schemes in American history directly into Democrat campaigns. Oh, and it gets even crazier than this, guys. The moment that this broke, Minnesota erupted. Federal agents, whistleblowers, buried warnings, Somali-linked fraud rings, the Feeding Our Future scandal exploding again, and now Democrat donors entangled in the very schemes that Tim Walz insisted had nothing to do with him. Oh, it gets bad. Real bad for Tim Walz. Now, here's a twist that nobody saw coming. This time is not just a scandal, it is a collapse. Poll numbers are tanking, whistleblowers emerging, Trump's Justice Department literally expanding federal review, and a Trump-backed challenger, yes, that challenger quietly preparing a move that could flip Minnesota and end Tim Walz's political career overnight. Stay locked in. What I'm about to show you, this is bigger than fraud. This is bigger than politics. This is the unraveling of a system and the beginning of a reckoning that Minnesota's leadership prayed would never come to light. Hit the like button and subscribe, guys. Drop a 47 in the comments down below if you support Trump's initiative here. The truth starts now. And before we dive into the first major revelation tonight, I do want you to think about something that's bigger than politics just for a moment. It's something personal. Now, you spent a lifetime building something, a home, a family, a future, a sense of stability. But here's a question that nobody wants to ask. What protects all of that when the system slips, right? Because if Minnesota can lose nearly $1 billion under the nose of its own governor, if entire agencies can miss fraud warnings in broad daylight, imagine how fragile the financial system really is. This is why I partner with Noble Gold Investments, guys. They help people protect their savings with real physical gold and silver assets that do not depend on politicians, bureaucrats, or Wall Street experts promising that they'll get it right this time. Now, most people don't need some sales pitch. Nobody wants that. They just need someone to ask the real questions to. Do you trust inflation to stop eating your savings? Do you trust the Fed to fix what it helped to break? I don't. When people answer honestly, they always say the same thing. Yeah, that makes sense. This is why countless Americans are calling the phone number at the bottom of your screen, 877-646-5347, or they're visiting RonYatesGold.com right now to get their free wealth protection kit. Link is down below, completely free, because protecting what you built isn't optional. This is your responsibility. Folks, the collapse truly begins right here, right now, because the newest filings unsealed late last night revealed something that Tim Walz's team prayed. They got down on their hands and knees and they prayed would never see daylight. Federal prosecutors under President Trump's Justice Department quietly updated their indictment sheets to include a stunning detail. Several individuals that are tied directly to Minnesota's pandemic fraud rings, they also made political donations to Democrat lawmakers, including more than $50,000 now identified in campaign finance records. Now, this ain't some rumor. This ain't Twitter gossip. These are federal documents. These are real contribution logs. And when investigators line up donation timestamps right on next to the fraudulent payouts, the pattern is unmistakable. The scandal here has officially crossed from government mismanagement into possible political entanglement, and Tim Walz's office is reportedly scrambling behind closed doors, reviewing staff communications, freezing press availability, and preparing statements that insiders say cannot stop what's coming. Now, Minnesota just hit a breaking point. Now we get to the monster that is at the epicenter of all of this, the Feeding Our Future scandal. What the country already knew was shocking enough. A supposed children's nonprofit that claimed to serve 91 million meals, siphoning off $250 million in taxpayer funds. Yeah, we already knew about that. But according to the updated indictments, that number may climb much higher, potentially crossing the $1 billion threshold when all associated shell companies, subcontractors, and fraudulent food sites are tallied. Federal investigators are now believing that Feeding Our Future wasn't just some rogue nonprofit. This was the hub of a sprawling network with tentacles reaching into real estate schemes, fabricated invoices, laundering operations, and businesses directly connected to figures celebrated inside Minnesota's political class. This is no longer one bad nonprofit. This is a systemic exploitation, and the scale implicates oversight breakdowns that point straight at the Walz administration. Now let's get into the part of the scandal that the national media still refuses to touch. Federal investigators noted a pattern. Many of the indicted organizations and the shell nonprofits were directly connected to Somali-led businesses and community groups operating inside of Minneapolis. And again, this is not about an entire community. This is more about specific actors named in federal documents who built a very sophisticated web of fake meal sites, fabricated attendance numbers, and coordinated kickback schemes. Now, here's the real scandal. Minnesota officials began spotting irregularities as early as 2019. Reviewers flagged unbelievable meal counts, impossible attendance numbers, and these astronomical billing spikes. But instead of tightening oversight, the warnings were brushed aside, sometimes overwritten after political pressure or legal threats. Now, those early failures are now fueling a national debate on why Minnesota leadership ignored red flags that were screaming for intervention. Now, before we get into the next topic, I do want to pause for something very important, because while we're talking about government failures and broken systems, real people are getting blindsided every single day by gaps that they didn't even know were there in their Medicare plans. A viewer recently told me that he got hit with a $900 medical bill the same month that his car broke down. Now, if that ain't Murphy, I don't know what is, right? And here's the heartbreaking part, right? His Medicare plan covered the visit, but not the procedure. Now, he told me it broke me emotionally more than financially. And that right there, guys, this is the cost of not knowing what's hiding inside your Medicare coverage. And this is exactly why I partner with Chapter. They make sure that you never get blindsided like that again. Now, most people are already calling the phone number at the bottom of your screen right there, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. There's a link down below. Go ahead and click that, because they don't want to risk another unexpected bill landing in their mailbox at the worst possible moment. And speaking of Chapter, I do want to share this message from Leanne Henry. She said, "I really like listening to you, Ron. You help me understand the news, and I like your voice too. I used Chapter, and it was a game changer. Thank you. God bless you always." Well, Leanne, thank you so much. Messages like that really remind me why I sit here every day covering the stories that the mainstream media refuses to touch and connecting people with resources that actually helped them. I'm just truly glad that Chapter made such a difference for you. And the deeper investigators are digging into this, the clearer the picture becomes. Minnesota's fraud crisis wasn't just a crime problem. This was a leadership failure. Internal DHS documents show that shortly after Tim Walz took office, state officials detected widespread anomalies in billing patterns for food programs and community nonprofits. Now, why do you think that happened right after Tim Walz got in office, right? Fraud indicators, they were not subtle. They were everywhere, according to auditors. Yet nothing changed. And now we know exactly why that happened. The anonymous X account claiming to represent 480 Minnesota DHS employees dropped a bombshell. They're saying the Tim Walz administration retaliated against whistleblowers, monitored internal conflicts, and pushed staff to look the other way whenever fraud reports threatened politically sensitive partnerships. Now, this isn't incompetence. Whistleblowers describe a culture of suppression where oversight laws were deliberately ignored to avoid political fallout. Minnesota didn't stumble into this crisis. Leadership walked straight into it. So now this is where the story turns from mismanagement to something way darker. According to the whistleblower group claiming representation of 480 DHS employees, Governor Tim Walz wasn't blindsided by this fraud. They claim he was warned early, repeatedly, directly, and chose not only to ignore those warnings, but to punish people who were raising them. So their testimony alleges that Walz senior appointees instructed staff to bury reports, halt investigations, and avoid creating political problems. Now, some whistleblowers are saying that they were threatened with demotion, reassignment, even career retaliation for insisting the state follow oversight laws. The words they used were chilling. "We alerted him early, hoping for partnership in stopping it. Instead, we got the opposite response." If even a fraction of these statements hold up under federal review, Walz's political future doesn't just weaken, it disintegrates. And so here's where everything intersects: fraud, oversight failure, and political power, reports are now confirming that individuals later indicted in these massive fraud schemes donated over $50,000 to Minnesota Democrat lawmakers. Contribution logs are now showing timing that raises immediate questions: donations flowing in while fraudulent invoices ballooned, fraudulent meal counts skyrocketed, and oversight mysteriously loosened. Now, nobody's claiming every Democrat knew the money was dirty, but prosecutors will absolutely ask, what access did these donors receive? What relationships existed? And why did oversight weaken precisely when these nonprofits began expanding their billing at impossible speeds? And even more damaging, several lawmakers have quietly returned the donations. This is essentially an admission that the money is now politically radioactive. And this is the follow the money moment of the scandal, folks. And for Tim Walz, it shatters the defense that this crisis was merely administrative. And so with the scandal now ballooning past $1 billion, the national response has officially arrived. President Donald J. Trump, now in his first year back in office, has officially instructed the DOJ, Treasury investigators, and federal auditors to expand their review of Minnesota's fraud programs. And make no mistake, this ain't symbolic. This is Washington stepping in because, well, the state failed to protect federal funds. Sources inside the administration say Minnesota is now considered the largest active fraud investigation in the country. Federal teams are reviewing grant disbursements, political communications, and program waivers issued during the Walz years. Now, here's what truly has Democrat leadership panicking. Federal oversight means that the state no longer controls the narrative. The timeline, the findings, the subpoenas, they're now in Trump's hands. For Walz, this is the moment the crisis stops being local and becomes national. So while investigators move in, Minnesotans are delivering their own verdict, and it is brutal. So Tim Walz's approval rating has cratered. It straight up collapsed to 47% approval, 47% disapproval. This is the lowest in 18 straight Survey USA polls. Among independents, he's hovering near 40%. This is a catastrophic number for a two-term incumbent. And in rural southern Minnesota, once competitive territory for Democrats, Walz is barely scraping by with a devastating 24% support. Now, this is not an erosion. This is a collapse. Voters who once tolerated Walz's leadership are now asking a very simple question. How did billions of dollars disappear while the governor claimed everything was under control, right? Rural families feel betrayed, urban voters feel misled, and independents, well, the ones who decide close races, they're fleeing in real time. The fraud didn't just damage state finances, it torched the governor's credibility, and his re-election suddenly looks completely impossible. So Minnesota has always carried this deep, almost electric populist undercurrent. This is the state that birthed the farmer labor movement. The state that elected Jesse Ventura, a professional wrestler with no political machine behind him, simply because voters were tired of establishment lies. That spirit never left, and this fraud scandal has reignited it like gasoline meeting a flame. People aren't just angry at the fraud, they're furious at the cover-ups, the retaliation, the ignored warnings, and the sense that political insiders protected each other while taxpayers got robbed. Minnesotans are reaching the breaking point where party loyalty fades and accountability becomes the only thing that matters. This is a populist revolt in real time, and the same independent streak that once shocked the nation by electing an outsider governor is now turning its sights directly on Tim Walz. And just when Democrats thought the scandal couldn't get worse, it did. Because the one challenger they never wanted to face, Mike Linden, has officially filed the paperwork to run for governor. And this isn't the 2020 era Lindell the media mocked. This is Lindell backed directly by President Donald J. Trump, the conservative base, and a national movement hungry for accountability. Now, Lindell brings something that no other challenger has, a personal relationship with Trump that translates into instant donor support, massive media reach, and grassroots enthusiasm that turns state races into national battles. He's running on audits, oversight, transparency, pretty much everything, exposing every dollar of this fraud scandal, exactly the pressure point that Tim Walz cannot survive. Democrats already did the math. $1 billion scandal plus collapsing polls plus Trump-backed Lindell equals a race they just may not be able to win. Now, here's where the entire scandal takes the most dangerous turn yet. Federal authorities, now working under President Trump's directive, they're quietly examining whether political influence played a role in weakening Minnesota's oversight systems between 2019 and 2021. Public documents already show that the Minnesota Department of Education rolled back oversight protocols after legal threats from some of the very organizations that are now indicted. Investigators want to know who requested the rollbacks, who benefited from those rollbacks, and were donors now charged in fraud schemes seeking political protection? These aren't conspiracy theories. These are active lines of inquiry confirmed through federal review notice and state audit logs. So if investigators determine that political considerations allowed fraud to grow unchecked, Minnesota won't just be facing a scandal. It will be facing the biggest governance failure in state history. And so now everything comes crashing together. The billion-dollar fraud web, the whistleblower testimonies, the retaliation claims, the ignored warnings, the Democrat donor connections, the national outrage, the Trump-ordered federal review, the polls collapsing, and the arrival of a Trump-backed challenger with nothing to lose and everything to expose. Now, for Tim Walz, this is no longer about damage control. This is about political survival, and the window for that survival is slamming shut. The scandal here has reached a point where even his own allies, they're distancing themselves from Tim Walz. Donors are freezing contributions, and voters across the political spectrum are demanding consequences. Minnesota isn't just watching a controversy unfold, it's watching a governorship unravel in real time. When fraud reaches this scale, accountability becomes inevitable. And for Tim Walz, that moment may finally be here. Hit the like button, subscribe for future updates.